Conversations. This is Cameron, and today, once again, I have Drew Nolosco from the Wizards of the Coast Transformers TCG team. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. It's good to be back with you.
I appreciate you coming back on. Last time we talked, we mentioned that you'd come back if we had some additional listener questions, and I have enough to the point where I'm not sure we'll get to all of them in
I
the
love
time we have allotted.
I love listening questions. Let's bring them on then.
Yeah, let's dive in. Okay, so the format I'm doing is I've got the question, and then I might have tweaked them a bit based on what the question is. The first one is from Helm. Is there a plan to make Titans more powerful? The basic idea is, the way I'm rewording it is, what additional fidelity and design do you think, now that we have, instead of standalone Titan box sets, you mentioned in a previous interview with Transform Your Game that they had been kind of moved into the box, the booster box. Do you think that's lended any additional fidelity in the design space to tweak with Titan Masters? I mean, we've seen Fortress Maximus, and he looks just significantly more powerful than what maybe Triptychon ended up being. Was that a result of him moving into a box set, into a booster box, versus designing him for a standalone set?
I think that was more the result of us getting just more iterations of watching players play Titans in the wild, and just getting more reps. 20 super high star cost teams where you basically have, a 20 plus star character are amongst the most challenging to design, because there's so little flexibility, right? Like with lower star characters, the ability to find synergies with other characters that could help out lower power characters, tribal synergies, that they all help out where, with a one giant character, you're pretty much locked in with that one giant character. So I think that it's really just design reps and seeing the Titans play out in the environment. And the second thing that I think is important with Titans is 25-star Titans are far more difficult to balance correctly than Titans that offer a little bit of customization and flexibility by being in the 20 to 23 and 24-star range.
Oh, that is true. Fortress Maximus being a headmaster does lend him like some additional customization options.
There's a little bit, and I mean, he's locked into Cerebros as by design, but I think a lesson that we've learned is give even high star count characters some star cost flexibility. And I know this character isn't a Titan, but Tidal Wave, the promo 3-part combiner, also inherently has some flexibility built into that. And I think that's something you're going to see a little bit more from us.
That actually kind of leads into another question, which is about kind of the evolution of the combiners. We originally saw them in Wave 2. We had the Enigma, and we had an optional mechanic with Dreadwing to do a different way to combine. I think maybe they started out, and I mean, I still love Menasor, but as the additional waves have come in, especially with the stats that Siege brought in with some of the characters like Galaxy Prime and Jetfire, the Wave 2 Titan combiners seem maybe a little underpowered compared to a modern combiner like Tidal Wave. Is that the same sort of thing where you're talking about just getting design reps in, seeing it out in the environment? Now you kind of can dial them in a little better?
I think that's part of it. I think that the two Rise of the combiners that have the most staying power are the Aerial Bots and Optimus Maximus. And with Optimus Maximus, that's partially because of the flexibility afforded by how that team works. And with the Aerial Bots, because the Aerial Bots are so effective in general at manipulating where damage is applied to characters on the team, that they still have some relevance. And as we've given blue pip decks additional tools, blue Aerial Bots can can continue to modify their battle deck to remain more relevant. But in general, I'd say yes. I've said this before, but Volcanicus, as he's originally printed, was underpowered, and that was a big miss for us, and something that we learned from.
Is that, I guess...
Go
go ahead.
The types of combiners that you've seen in the last several sets, which haven't been the wide teams like 5 and 6 part teams, that's partially because we're going to save those for the next time we do a set that's themed around them, where you would expect to see many of the combiners that people are probably have asked you, hey, are they going to do this combiner who I love?
Yeah. That's all. I've already got like several questions of those that I've kind of checked off.
And the answer is, yeah, you know, the next time we do wide combiner teams using triple-sided cards, a lot of the combiner teams that people are hoping will make it into the game, that they're certainly under consideration, right? Like I can't specifically say
right. That's in the future. I guess just in the vein of, as you're considering those with like really cool combiners coming out like Tidal Wave, and I got to tell you, I am super excited for Sky Shadow. Like that guy just looks awesome. But both of them, they're not super traditional combiners, so they don't have the Enigma. If we went in the future, we saw a second dedicated combiner wave, is the team kind of committed to the Enigma on those wider teams, or has that design space opened up now that you've seen the way these other combiners can work?
We haven't set anything in stone there yet. One of the things that we liked about the recent combiners like Tidal Wave is and Omega Supreme is not having to have an Enigma for them, and that was really interesting. But we haven't ruled out Enigmas for future combiners either. I think what we would do is we'd keep Enigmas to 5 and 6 part teams, and have that be kind of their hallmark. But again, that's not set in stone. So I imagine you could certainly see a combiner team that's 5 or 6 characters. Interestingly, there aren't that many 4-part combiners. 5 or 6 characters that doesn't use an Enigma, but that's farther in the future.
Yeah, I guess this next question kind of goes into the future, so we can... I'll ask it anyway. This just has to do with Galvatron. I know previously you said that a raid deck for Unicron was kind of being tweaked. Galvatron was a character in the Titans Return line. Obviously, if he's in it, we haven't seen it as a spoiler yet. But is that sort of movie iconic characters, is that something that might be saved for a raid deck in the future, or is that something? No comment.
We would want to do Unicron, Galvatron, and the other associated characters in one product that sort of celebrated that.
Yep.
There is no Titans Return Galvatron. Someone's bubble is being bursted right now, but
I don't know. But, I'm most excited about. I can't wait till I see. I'm obviously we don't know. Well, you know, I don't know. Titans Return Megatron, just because Titans Masters attack Megatron. I'm hoping if he exists, that we get to see Triple Changer Megatron, because that's how it was in the toy line. And I'd be super curious to see what sort of weird shenanigans the design space for a triple changing Titan Master would be. Fingers
there
crossed.
were a lot of design space shenanigans for that, but we made a pretty critical decision to not have triple-sided cards in this set.
Oh, okay.
Triple-sided cards require a fairly hefty investment in the number of cards. It's something that we would in the future want to save so that there's high enough density of triple-sided characters.
Oh, that makes sense. There's a minimum, like, say, print amount for a sheet or something like that.
Yeah, there are logistics and production issues that make it more difficult and challenging to just do 1 or 2 characters as triple changers, or 3-part combiner pieces. So yeah, no solo triple changer Megatron, and we most recently did that with a bunch of triple changers in Siege.
Yeah.
And so it'll probably be a couple of sets before we go back to triple changers.
That makes sense. This next one I think is from Power Helm again. It just says Icon has sea spray. Let me reinterpret this one. I wanted to ask you about...
No interpretation necessary. I understand.
Well, my takeaway from this is actually it's been really cool to see the different sizes of robots that we've seen, not just physical cards, but we start out with standard card size, standard characters, and then we stepped into Battle Masters, which were smaller, and then Micromasters, which were even smaller. Titan Masters are tiny, and now in with the reveals we've had, especially with the super rares that look awesome in Titan Masters Attack, some of those, like Wind Charger is one of those mini bots. Do you think, like in Siege, we saw kind of these tiny robots in Micromasters and Battle Masters, and then big robots like Galaxy Prime and Jetfire. In Titan Masters, was there a conscious design decision, because you have the bodies and heads, that the average body head pair would be somewhere in the mid-range between, say, 7 and 12 stars? Or was that just a result of that gimmick being implemented?
It was a combination of the both. Originally, the design for Titan Masters involved many lower star bodies and heads, and the average cost of star cost was lower, so that you could run more, and swapping heads was more of a thing, and that just wasn't very satisfying. They were kind of underpowered characters, or we had to overstat them for their star cost, and that made this power creep that we were not happy with. And that's why we bumped up the beefiness and the star cost, so that you're playing... They're more like the regular mid-sized characters that typically fit on a 3-wide team. With a few exceptions. There are some that cost more, and obviously if you put a 4-star head on some of the larger bodies, you're going to get a higher cost character. Mm-hmm. But I would say that this was mostly to make the combined heads and bodies feel good and relevant, and that switched our focus a little bit less on swapping around heads to more enabling customization, so you could fill in roles on teams that were really interesting without having to care about having multiple Titan Master bodies and head partnerships on your team.
Yeah, I do like... I mean, I'll admit that I've been playtesting and tweaking Proxy already. It has been interesting to see that kind of what we traditionally thought is, oh, this is a 3-wide aggro setup, it'll lose to wide, like a 3-wide aggro setup loses to bugs or airstrike patrol. Now, if I've got maybe 1 or 2 Titan Masters on it, all of a sudden, well, I get 1 more attack after my guy dies, or I get 2 more attacks after these 2 guys die, and it really changes the mechanics of the way the game flows.
I think a lot of players are going to find that once they get to play it. It's difficult to convey that just by words. Mm-hmm. The extra, literally the extra character that you get from the head converting into a robot throws off the attack defense number of attacks and defense math so much that it really can have a very big impact. Either as you've said, through getting the extra attacks, but there's also ways to make sure that those heads are absorbing hits that otherwise would have gone to another character, and that can also be really powerful, because it's overkill in this game is inefficiency, right? Like if you do 13 points of damage to KO a character that only needed 2 points dealt to it, well, you kind of wasted your attack.
Yep.
So I think people are going to find some really interesting emergent gameplay as the math starts to go kind of sideways from what they've previously experienced, and games get, I think, a little bit more unpredictable.
Yeah, I know there's no organized play announcements yet. I think you guys are waiting till we get a little closer to launch date, but I can't imagine how the first big tournament with this is going to go. I'm anticipating a lot of insanity, as the field's just going to be so wide. It's really exciting.
I think that's pretty true. I think there's a lot of people who are going to need to brew quite a bit to figure out what even the shape of the metagame looks like after Titan Masters, and that was really intentional. Mm-hmm. With the first release of 2020, we knew we wanted to shake things up quite a bit, and both the customization options in Titan Masters, and to a lesser degree, and also the sort of change in the fundamental gameplay, the fundamental back and forth that the head and body combinations bring. And then also to a lesser degree, stratagems. We really wanted to just crack things open and let people get back into that homebrew, test, refine, virtuous cycle that really is kind of rewarding.
Yeah, it's even so far. I mean, I think we've got most of the characters now, but we've only seen a fraction of the battle cards, and it feels so different than it used to be. This next one, I guess it's the question is, will we ever see cards packed in cross-promotional ways? I feel like I might already know the answer to that, but I guess what sort of, if you can speak to it, and I realize some of this might be insider business stuff that you can't speak to, but what sort of limitations affect the ability to promote the TCG in a toy set? In my mind, I think about, okay, can the character be so good or things like that? Is there anything else that would go into consideration? For example, putting a grapple card in one of the new Earthrise grapple toys.
The item that you mentioned right there, which is what is the power level of a card that gets super widely distributed for free, effectively, right? Like you'd be buying the toy that it came in.
Yeah.
It is certainly something that we need to take in consideration. But honestly, there's a lot. The thing that's really limited that so far is not lack of interest, but more just logistical hurdles. Transformers cards are manufactured in the United States. They'd have to be shipped overseas. The timing it has been challenging.
Oh yeah, that's a very good point.
It's certainly something that we have talked about, and I don't really have any updates on when that would happen. But I would say that there's, it's something that we've all expressed desire to see. It's just hasn't gelled yet.
Yeah, logistical realities can definitely, I mean, that's put the kibosh on many a wonderful idea. What about, I guess this one's pretty short. Does Wizards of the Coast, do you guys do visits or tours to your offices? This just says, can we come visit the offices?
Wow, I actually don't know what the official answer to that is.
So Drew will get back to us at some point. I'm assuming no, because it is an office building. Like, you can't just have anyone walking in there. But
so I would say call the main reception desk number. You can find that on the web somewhere or on our webpage to contact us. Maybe an email form at this point, and see what they say.
Sounds good. Well, Energon Edition 2.0, I'm sure that will happen, but sometime in the future.
Okay. We're far away from talking about Energon Edition 2.0 if that ever happens.
Yep. How about, so you just mentioned, this is actually a good one. You just mentioned that I know Transformers cards are made in the States, and I think we talked about it before, and you mentioned that they were made somewhere in Texas, I think. Is there ever a possibility, there's the How It's Made TV show, would that ever be a possibility to see how Transformers cards or Magic cards are produced?
I don't think so. I think that falls under the general trade secrets.
That makes sense.
Making Magic cards and Transformers cards is a pretty complex process. That's probably more complex than some people imagine if they're not directly experienced with print production. So I doubt that would ever be the case.
Gotcha. This one is okay. So previously we've seen a trend to bots getting extra actions like confidence, and cons getting more extra upgrade plays like trigger happy, General Megatron, swindled. It seems like in Siege 2 we kind of saw a mix of that. Jetfire gets upgrades, Galaxy Prime gets upgrades, and now in Titan Master's Attack, Brainstorm is doing that mechanic. Was there at any point a conscious transition from trying to do a mirror mechanic between actions and upgrades, or do you find the Autobots and Decepticons distinct in other ways, whether mechanically or lore based, than you may have when you were first working on the game in Wave 1?
I think that in earlier design philosophy, there was a little bit more of the let's try something super, super tightly mechanical like actions and upgrades that that would be assigned to the factions in a greater proportion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we've seen is that's not the greatest way to do it. And so something like caring about actions and upgrades, I think, is going to be, as you're seeing in Titans, and even the shift since Wave 2, I think that is not how you're going to see it in the future.
Yep. Yeah, like
everybody
we've seen horrible gets ping damage off black cards in general instead of just like upgrades or something.
Not that particularly, but yeah. Because actions and upgrades are two fundamental card types, I think we and the folks on the design team don't want to inhibit players from having that creativity in looking at all the card types when they're building decks and access to them.
Mm-hmm.
Specific characters, however, are a different question, a different story. There are certainly going to be characters that have, as more versions of them are printed, show a pretty strong line to care about something. And that's really just taking the nature of the character from the story and IP and translating it into a game piece.
Shockwave is probably my favorite example of that. He's the logical, scheming scientist guy with plans within plans, and then in the two Shockwaves we've seen so far, he cares about sculpting your opponent's hand and gaining advantage through that. I really think like that's my held up example as a thematic mechanic in the Transformers TCG.
I'm really pleased with both Shockwaves. I was very happy that double Shockwave decks existed.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a lot more secret option choices showing up in Titan Masters Attack and creating some new partners, particularly with Siege Shockwave.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Shockwave 2 is going to remain relevant, particularly in the metagame, for a long time.
This next one, that's more about a 1986 movie set, so that's already been discussed. This one's an interesting one. This is from, I forget who the asker was, but it's as a parent of a child who is obsessed like me about the Transformers trading card game, I guess when you guys are designing new sets and rules and cards, how do you make sure the game is mechanically deep for older kids, but still accessible for younger kids? And is there, I mean, you guys have to have some sort of target age range, I'm assuming, when you design the game. And then did you differentiate between what you wanted in a starter set versus a booster box along any age lines?
Oh, that's a great series of questions. I think the primary thing that questioner should know is everyone who works on the Transformers TCG team has pretty significant experience with both adult and younger people's TCGs. There's a lot of crossover with the Duel Masters team, which is the trading card game primarily for youngsters that we release only in Japanese language. A lot of us also have experience with Kaijudo, which was a younger person's TCG that Wizards had done in the past. And I personally have experience with kids games prior to me coming to Wizards. So we bring all of that experience together. And yes, when you said, I think the most interesting question is, what is the target? I think it really is, there are different targets that we hit inside of each set, and not all of them are related to age. And age is really, what we're really saying here is how easily can folks grok information, right? So some cards are just obvious. That's why we always make sure that there are characters that have big, obvious numbers on them. Younger folks tend to gravitate towards that. Perhaps not yet hitting the stride where they can recognize and use some of the subtleties. And then we also have cards that allow for deeper play. So let's take Wave 1 Jetfire as an example here. Jetfire, you flip them, you get an equipment back. That's a very on its surface basic ability. I can get something cool, an upgrade out of my discard pile, put it back on. but that leads to emergent gameplay when he's combined with other characters. So I think the most precise answer to your question is when characters are looked at in isolation, we want some percentage of them to be exciting and grokkable for folks, and then when players who have go deeper, they find combinations of cards and characters that are exciting. And this is true for, I think, all trading card games. We see this in Magic. One of the player psychographics that Mark Rosewater frequently talks about is Timmy or Tammy. And these are players who want big, obviously exciting moments. And that sort of design philosophy definitely does make it through to Transformers. I would say the biggest challenge to this in Transformers is, and I feel like a broken record sometimes, because not having a casting cost or resource system does make it really challenging to have super big, exciting moments, because some cards need to be stronger than others if in a scenario for big, exciting moments.
Yep.
And without a costing system, it's difficult to balance them. So I would say something like Ghost Shield and Master Sword from Titan Master's Attack is one of the ways that we're looking for big, exciting numbers, and sort of secretly sticking a costing resource requirement mechanic in there in order to achieve that.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see the way you guys can play with so much of the design space on the cards themselves. Like for example, like the Master Sword, it's not immediately, it won't immediately cost you anything unless you just don't have another weapon on a character. But I love the idea that, okay, you build up, you get your second weapon, then you can play this, and then also you can protect it with whatever you have in your hand. It's a cool bit of complexity laid on top of that bigger number.
Right. It's essentially costing you an additional upgrade play.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends. For some characters who you probably don't want to try and put Master Sword on, it costs you more than one if that character has multiple weapon slots.
Yeah.
I would recommend not pairing those together. Definitely a non-vote.
Right.
But that was one way of doing it. In previous sets, we've had cards that say you must have played a previous card in order to do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically another way to distribute the quote cost amongst multiple cards. And then star costs obviously are a more obvious version of that.
Do you think, as you guys have been pulling and tweaking all sorts of levers throughout the 4 waves that have come out in the game, and then Titan Master's Attack comes out April 17th, is there levers that you've pulled in the past? For example, you must play, I forget off the top of my head, there was the Superior series, but you had to play Tech, sorry, I forget the name of the card off the top of my head, but you had to play the green pip Tech card before you could play a superior weapon. Is that something that you'd build on in another wave, or do you think you've tested out, you kind of saw how it did in the field, and now you're going to the Master Sword Ghost Shield route?
I think right now we're still exploring a variety of ways to do mechanics like that. Mm-hmm. I think we'll see how the player base responds to the Master Shield, the replace an existing weapon mechanic. Tech research was fine. The problem with tech research is, as the game evolves, there will be more and more ways to cheat cards that otherwise require tech research. Mm-hmm. And that's something we would watch for. I think tech research is okay, but not awesome. And if we revisit it, we'd want to tweak it some.
Gotcha. This one, next question builds off of that question about the in terms of designing the game and what things are accessible for children. Are there any, in your experience in other games, are there any learning tools or teaching tools that aren't implemented in the Transformers TCG environment yet that you think would be good fits for it in the future. In my mind, I think of the videos that came out when the game came out. I don't remember if off the top of my head if those have been elaborated on as we've gotten new mechanics, or is there anything else you've seen in other games that you've worked on previously that you think, oh, this will be a helpful way to teach kids the game in the future, like paper like play mats or anything like that?
So there's for trading card games, and I think this is just true of the genre. There's nothing that beats someone else teaching. I would say the next best thing is, say, an interactive tutorial, and then video comes in third. Teaching is something that great game stores do, is they're demoing games. It's what friend groups do, as they introduce new players, and ultimately that is the best way to learn Transformers, and I think any trading card game. I would say one thing that we don't have right now that I'm not trying to hide anything here, we don't really have any plans for it at this moment, is multiplayer formats. We found multiplayer formats to be very, very good for learning, which is kind of paradoxical. On one hand, there's more cards in play, so the board state is more complex. But on the other hand, and this is overwhelmingly on the other hand, there's more people to answer questions.
Yep.
And there's less of a 1v1 dueling where, I'm going to ask my opponent, is this the right thing to do? And
right. You're not trying to beat your teacher.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't have a multiplayer format right now. I've seen some interesting multiplayer formats from the fan communities, but we don't have any plans to release a multiplayer format in the foreseeable future. But I would say that is one helpful learning element that we don't yet have.
Yeah, I'd be excited. I mean, I've played around with multiplayer formats myself a couple times at a local game store, and I've tried some of the rule sets that have been up in like the Facebook group. I'd be super excited to see as it keeps being tweaked by the community. But I might be incorrect just because I'm less familiar with Magic. I feel like the Magic multiplayer format started out fan-made also, correct? Like Commander was kind of a casual format before Wizards started supporting it officially. So I'm sure as our formats keep getting tweaked, hopefully in sometime in the future, I could see a very fun official format coming out.
Commander's kind of interesting because in some ways, yes, it was created by people who were not Wizards employees, but they were judges for high-level professional events for Magic, and they played
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So it was judges in the downtime at Pro Tours who put it together, and so while it was definitely fan-made, it was really not designed to be a casual format. But since the beauty of the format is it allows people to play at the level of complexity and competitiveness that they want to play, as long as you find a group that agrees with you, you have a great time and everybody's having fun.
Yep, there's the social contract element.
Yes, it's actually something that I talk about a lot, is the social contract of game groups. How do you find a game group that shares your and this is specifically only about like gameplay goals. How do they share your views and your goals, so that you can find a group that you're comfortable with playing it at, and everybody has a great time.
Yeah, that's been an interesting thing that's been evolving for us locally. As we kind of started out strong, we had a store close down, and since then we've made a lot of effort to expand our local group of players to a couple different stores with new player nights, and it's been a really rewarding experience to find the different styles that people want to play, help people learn, and then lock in with some friends that kind of share the same level that I'd like to play the game at. Has been a lot of fun, but then also be able to support a more casual environment.
People move from playgroup to playgroup and play in multiple playgroups at the same time, right? Like different players have different needs as players that express themselves in different ways in different times. So, you can have a casual group that just plays homebrew stuff and is trying to do funky things with Transformers deck builds. And you could also simultaneously play in a group that's trying to solve the local metagame. Like both, these are not
mutually exclusive.
Exactly.
Yep. Actually, so your history lesson about judges and their creation of Commander actually kind of segues into the next question on the list, which is it's a little fuzzy wording, but I'm going to interpret it as besides the store promo kits, which I was super excited. I got 3 stores locally to lock in. So we're getting Tidal Wave, Arcana, and then Dan Arnold's EI Perceptor. Besides
Convex.
those... Oh, go ahead.
And Convex.
And Convex. Yes, his head. Besides those promo cards, which are, it's been a cool evolution to see how the promo kit has expanded. I think this question's more about a judge program, which probably, I don't know if there's a lot of relevance to Transformers right now, but what other tools do you think you have in the tool belt that we might see sometime in the future in terms of expanding the rewards for getting local participation in local events?
The in-store play kits are going to remain the core of that. We've made some significant differences with this in-store play kit, moving to all mechanically new cards.
Yes.
And I want to see how that performs before we start making other radical changes, right? And you do a thing, you have to see the data back before you make other changes. Otherwise, you never understand what's happened.
Yep.
So I think in the very short-term future, the Wave 5 kit is going to be the prototype, and we'll see what that does.
I'm super excited.
Sorry, go ahead.
Was any of, I guess, because you had mentioned in a previous interview, I think with Powered by Primus, like that Trypticon and Fort Max were originally standalone kits that went into the booster box. Was any of the promo kit, like Tidal Wave, going to be? No, it was all designed strictly for the promo.
Correct.
That's awesome.
We made an intentional decision after looking at data from the last 2 kits as to how to increase the number of players who would come back in subsequent weeks. For example, we saw many people get Smashdown, and then the gold foiled promos were, some people really loved it and wanted more than they could acquire. There were multiple decks, and some people didn't care. So we wanted to provide an additional tool for stores who run multiple weeks of in-store play, which all stores should, to get people to come back in that second or third week.
Yeah. I mean, Smashdown and Nightbird were super exciting. Nightbird's a lot of fun to play with, so getting a couple copies of her was awesome.
And Nightbird's really interesting because she has at least at the time, had a very unique ability. But by putting Tidal Wave, and we did this very intentionally as a 3-part combiner, because clearly it compels you to, once you get the first piece, to come back and get the other 2 pieces. So we're going to see how that does. I would say that additional things that we're doing are app development is a somewhat of a slow process, but improvements to the app continue to happen, both with every release and over time. So that's another place where we are improving players' ability to support themselves and their events that they run themselves. But the main focus is supporting local game stores. And so we're pouring most of the energy into providing these free kits.
And in that vein, these are actually some great segues if I stopped calling each one out. In that vein, supporting local play and getting people to buy sealed product is right. That's the big part of marketing. That's kind of your responsibility, and the team is to help advertise and market the game. In terms of sealed product, Wave 3 and 4, Siege 1 and 2 were really interesting because of the way they work together in a sealed format, and I had a ton of fun with that. Did the design going into Titan Masters attack change the way you approached it in sealed because it was going to be a standalone kind of look back wave versus a 2-parter?
I would say that many of the things that we learned about sealed went into Titan Masters attack. One of them was the distribution of star costs across characters. Some of it was production related, making sure that there was a head guaranteed. Guaranteed is never a good word to use. That every body should be paired with a head inside of a pack.
Oh, that's interesting. I guess I didn't realize that, because I was going to ask about, because I know Turbo Sealed is popular in one of my local game stores, and I was going to ask, so a body can't appear with a stratagem card, or not can't, but a body shouldn't appear with a stratagem card. Okay.
Everybody should have a head in its pack and vice versa. So that for Turbo Sealed, you, at the very least, you just play that body and that head as a character.
That is logistically, that is fascinating. I'm sure that had to be a puzzle to solve.
Then the non-Titan Master large character cards have a stratagem in those packs. So yes, that for example was very specifically one of the things that we did to ensure limited play was more interesting and more fun. There are a very, very tiny, it's like 3 or 4 battle cards that were previously printed in others in old sets that are reprinted in Titan Masters Attack. You haven't seen them yet. Improvised Shield, for example, is one of them.
Ooh, spoiler okay, gotcha.
And they all have new art. I say Improvised Shield because it's Megatron who's picked up a car and is using it as a shield.
I'll throw up a hand-drawn picture right now. This is exactly what it looks like, everyone. You've seen it here first.
There we go. You're next on the art roster there.
Yeah.
By having those very small number of reprinted cards, we put them in for specific limited reasons. We always want the density of certain effects to show up at the right ratios, and we don't want to basically reprint the same card over and over again with a different name, because that inevitably leads to weird, like there's something we end up not thinking about, and for some reason having 9 cards that all do what Improvised Shield does suddenly matters like 3 years from now and everybody's crying.
Right, or having 9 different ways to play double pips without paying a star cost might make Metroplex kind of good.
That is the specific thing, right? Yeah. It's the double pips. We want them to appear in a certain density, but we don't want you to be able to play too many of them constructed. So that's another thing that we do for limited. We actually think Turbo Sealed is a fantastic asset for the game. It's a very unique format. There aren't many games that have that built in as an integral part. So it's something that plus regular sealed deck is something that we definitely build for.
Yeah, I'll admit I wasn't super excited about Turbo Sealed when I first saw it. I didn't end up playing it at Origins or Gen Con last year. I think the first time I played it was just at a local game night where I was helping some new players learn the game and wanted to support the store and buy some product. But then once we cracked some packs open, I was like, oh yeah, this is a lot of fun. So I appreciate you clarifying how the booster packs are intended to work. That's really interesting. I wasn't thinking about that. I just figured there might be a chance that you get a bum matchup of 2 bodies and no stratagems, but you're right that would be no bueno.
That would be very unfun.
Yeah. To piggyback on this, so you talked about previously the way you learn from stores and their participation and things like that. Is there this is kind of more developed on the actual wording of the question is, does what we the players develop as the meta influence the process at all in terms of both design and play tests? I want to tweak that a bit, and I guess I'd be most curious to understand what information you can share in terms of the information you do look at when we review the health of the game. Previously, you've mentioned that you look at booster box opening videos to kind of gauge excitedness levels. I know you guys have done articles at the bigger tournaments and things like that. What sorts of bits of information do you try and gather from the world around you when you're assessing the health of the game?
There's a lot. But I'm going to start by answering the viewer's direct question, which is yes, we absolutely do look at what players brew and build. There are so many more players than there are designers. Game designers on the team. That our collective many years of experience gives us good intuition that we back up with data during play testing internally as to how things will perform. This is distinctly not pejorative. The brute force play testing and design work done by the community dwarfs the number of hours that we can put in, just because there's so many people who are putting so much thought into it.
Yeah, unfortunately, you guys need sleep and food and things like that, right?
Food is critical. Occasionally caffeine. But that is actually probably the most important thing is what are players building? And there's two aspects to that. There's what are players possibly building, and then what are players actually playing. So what I mean by that first part is someone comes up with this deck and they post it online, and we're like, oh wow, we didn't think of that combination. That's super interesting. But then that combination, like that thing that was discovered through emergent design by the community, will influence how we think of the cards, because now there's a connection between cards that for some reason we didn't find. But it may not be played. Like, there are tons of times where people are like, hey, if you get these 7 cards in this order, you can do these amazing things. It's an infinite engine. And we are like, chances of that happening, remote, not interesting, but it's not really something we need to care about. But that brings in the second part, which is what are people actually playing? And from a practical point of view, I think this is the most important part, because when we see what people play, it's telling us a couple of things. First, what do the players think is really good and powerful to play? And that may or may not always be the truth, but over time that converges with the truth. So if, like, for example, by the Energon Invitational last year, the most competitive players had basically converged on probably the top 3 best decks, even though there was plenty of diversity. So what we want to see in an ideal world is many decks that are all within several percentage points of one another in terms of win rates, where people have lots of choice, and it inspires innovation.
Are win rates something you guys have access to outside of the big tournaments?
Can't really answer that one.
Okay, fair enough.
There's really win rates against other decks in the meta, right? Like, it's not raw win rates. It's like, does deck A, what's its win percentage against deck B?
These matchups, yep.
It's really matchup percentages. And where was I going with this?
I think you were you were giving an example about what was seen at Energon Invitational and how that reflected what players perceived to be the dangerous stuff versus what reality was.
So people brew a lot of things and put them online and then play them in local events. And like, this just sort of converges into what are the better decks that people are going to take with them to big events. There's always going to be some players who hold back tech because they want to save it for a big event. And you know what? That's great. And that's fine. The big events also are proving grounds. Like, there were many rounds that the decks that made it to the top 4 and the top 8, there's some amount of luck there. There always is, but that gave us a pretty good estimation, and we saw it was healthy because we saw a diversity of decks. We saw some deck archetypes that we knew would show up. Like, we were not surprised that an Decepticon deck show up, and I think Jimmy was piloting it. But Jimmy's deck build was very unusual. So we're looking for evolution over time of a metagame. We are not looking for staleness. We don't want it to be solved, and in a way that it's unfun. Which I mean by, like, a very tiny number of decks, or worst comes to worst, one deck that is the meta deck, and then the deck that beats the meta deck, and that's it. That's not the world that anyone wants to be in. I answered the question.
Yes.
Did I cover it?
Absolutely.
I kind of got on that one. Sorry, Cameron.
No, listen, I appreciate a good ramble. The next 3 are kind of yes or no, so I'm going to go ahead and answer them. Has the game maxed out the number of different colors for icons? I am sure the answer to that is not yet. Stay tuned in the future.
Correct, but there's not going to be any added soon.
Yep. This one is asking about a specific ability we might see in the future. I'm sure that you guys have all sorts of keywords and abilities that we'll see in the future. Okay. This one I'm not expecting a serious answer on, The question is, why do you hate jazz? And I wrote a note to myself, figure out a way to reword it, but I didn't.
Okay, hold on a second. I have a file on why I hate jazz.
Oh, perfect.
Here we go. Sorry, there's going to be some clicking in the background as I navigate on my computer, searching. Why do I hate jazz?
Too big to open, right?
Okay. So I like more melody in my music, and I'm much less concerned about jazz, like music that jumps around, kind of. That's not what you were asking, was it?
No.
Don't hate jazz. Jazz just hasn't shown up again recently. When he does, you'll see a more modern take on jazz.
Yeah, my money is fingers crossed, knock on wood, because I would really love it. I'm hoping Jazz shows up in a future wave. He wasn't in Titans Return. He shows up in a future wave in a new toy line also, because I would love a new Jazz toy. This was actually answered, I think, in a Powered by Primus interview. The question is, why does Optimus Prime come out in every wave? And the answer to that we know is that we want to make sure that every wave is a good opportunity for a new player to jump into the game, and being able to get their hands on their favorite characters like Optimus Prime Megatron is a great thing to be able to do. I did have a tweak to this question, which is, in terms of legality, does the TCG allow any opportunity for Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro to preserve trademarks and copyrights for character names, such as like Horrible, for example? He hasn't had a toy in a while. He had a little toy in Titans Return. Does having a Horrible in the TCG preserve any sort of trademark on the character in general for the two companies?
I don't know how to answer that because I'm not an IP law expert.
Gotcha.
But I will say that everybody everywhere is happy when we have obscure characters in the TCG.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think Night Racer is my freaking most favorite card you've ever done.
That's a massive special.
Huh? Oh, I'm sure it is. I saw that card and I was like, yeah, he knows. I knew about the character because she had a toy come out in a recent BotCon, but then when I did some digging into the history of her, I didn't realize that she was created for the original 1995 BotCon, which I just thought was like a great bit of meta trivia in the franchise to have in the card game. That makes me really excited.
I think the version of Windsweeper that we did in this set is also based on an exclusive.
Yes. It's actually, I mean, that's not one of my list of questions, but if we had time to get to my own questions, I was going to ask about that, because we have Windsweeper, we have Bludgeon, we have the Wreckers in the wave, and we also have these Mayhem Squad Decepticons, which were in lore kind of the opposite faction of the Wreckers. I was assuming that was a conscious push by Matt Smith that if we have the Wreckers, we got to have kind of their nemesis in the game. But I wanted to see if you could elaborate on that at all.
I think it was a conscious decision. I think also that the Wreckers overall are more well known. Mm-hmm. In the same way that Impactor wasn't a Wrecker in his first appearance, maybe we'll have the Mayhem Squad, show up in that form at some point in the future. But we knew we couldn't fit everybody in, so it didn't seem correct that we put in a couple of members of the Mayhem Squad that didn't really have support, and then attempt to finish them at some other set, some other time. Mm-hmm. Like with the Wreckers, we got a reasonable number of Wreckers in this set.
Yes, and I don't know if we've even seen all of them yet. But
I don't know if you've seen all of them. But we got a bunch, and it feels like there's robust Wrecker support. You can play more than one Wrecker deck.
Yes.
We didn't have a lot of room between Titan Masters and Wreckers, so we didn't do Mayhem Squad as their own standalone, as their own supported faction. But that's not out of the realm of possibility for the future.
Yeah, I think it would be neat. I mean, that there is just so much space to play around. Same with going back to what you were saying about the traditional combiners from Wave 2. If new ones come out in the future, that doesn't mean that we don't get a new version of Superion at some point in the future that could use Superion's old battle cards and things like that. There's just so many levers you can pull on one of these cards, the character cards. That's a lot of fun to play with.
Yeah, absolutely could. But I think if we did that before putting out, say, like Computron, there would be some very upset players.
Yeah, I'm sure people would riot.
I mean, also like 3 people who super, super love Betatron. And, if we don't get every, combiner done before we start reprinting combiners, I think that we would be doing a disservice to fans. That's not to say that that's exactly how it'll play out, but we certainly want to hit all of the major combiners that we haven't done.
Yeah, I'll admit that Titan Masters excite me more just because that was my favorite gimmick. But I'm sure that there are way more people clamoring for Bruticus. Everyone loves that guy. But I'm going to enjoy this next wave all the same. I think, I've got one more listener question.
I can answer one more listener question.
Perfect. This one is, it's about Megatron and different forms characters can take. So I was going to ask it. We've seen different versions. For example, Optimus Prime, we got Gleaming Commander, which was a different toy. Galaxy Commander, which was kind of a different version of the character. Same with Springer, Megatron. We've seen different forms that different characters can take. In terms of art style, we haven't seen alternate color schemes. We've just seen alternate art. For example, the Energon edition, Battlefield Legend Optimus got a whole new art scheme. Do you think there's any, and this might be diving into the manufacturing of a card process, when you get art for a card, how hard would it be if you wanted to in the future do a strict repaint? For example, doing a Megatron in his G2 color scheme with the same art. Is that something that's feasible, or would it just be, if you want to do that character, it would be a whole new art piece?
That was literally what had come to mind when you were saying this, because of the Pulse toy, Megatron toy that had come out, I guess, like around this time last year.
Yes.
So it certainly is possible, but I'd almost rather just put out a separate new Megatron design. If we've got a cool, really interesting visual take on a character that is clearly a different iteration of the character, like even if it uses the same toy mold as its inspiration, I'd almost rather just do a separate character. Like G2 had a bunch of funkiness into it that I think that we could do a Megatron in his G2 tank scheme and coloration, and just have it feel different.
Yeah, that is true. I guess if you're putting in the effort to tweak the art at that level, it's probably not that much increased effort to do a new card.
There's the game from a production point of view. No, there's no difference. If we're tweaking the art or printing it, it's the same as doing a whole new thing. From a game design point of view, yes, clearly there's game design that would have to be done. And that can be a varying amount of work. But really, it's if a player really cares about the G2 version of Megatron, that's their favorite version of Megatron. If we just do it as a palette swap on an existing card, that doesn't really feel good for that player, and that player's probably disappointed, and that's not what we want.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense, right? As someone who is a big G2 Megatron fan, you're right. I don't know that I'd be fully satisfied just getting a reprint of one of the other Megatrons in new colors. But that was the entire... I think we went faster than I was expecting. I kind of felt like I'd have some questions left over at the end of it. But thanks so much, Drew. We got through the entire list.
I am always happy to answer fan and listener questions. I appreciate you facilitating this. As always, it's good to be talking with you.
Thank you very much. And everyone who's listening probably already knows, but in case you don't, Titan Masters Attack comes out as of the time this video goes up, I think it'll be almost 1 month. It's April 17th. And I'm looking forward to the rest of spoiler season, and then getting my hands on some of these characters and start building up some decks when it comes out.
Look forward to getting everybody getting their hands on it, and I will see you in stores in April.
Sounds great. Thanks, Drew.
Everybody.